Hello, my name is Ayeneh.
My name is Melody Shadanlu.
And my name is Ryan Fekrat.
And welcome to صدای دانشجو. So in today's episode, we are going to be talking about something a lot of students may be curious about, but don't know where to start, and that is research. When we say research, a lot of people picture lab coats, microscopes, but actually it's much more broader than that. Research can be in public health, computer science, psychology, you name it. And within the sciences, you may have different settings, like wet labs, which deal with things like cell cultures and chemicals, and dry labs, which may involve data analysis, simulations, or codings. Today, we will be breaking it down step by step, different types of research, how to find opportunities, and how to approach professors and personal investigators, what to expect during interviews, and how to make the most of your experience once you're in it. We'll also be sharing our own stories and tips so you have a clearer idea of what works in the real world. So let's start off by talking about what we mean when we say research. When you guys first thought of research in college, what came to mind, and how was that different or maybe similar to your experiences?
Boring. When I first thought of research in college, I thought, oh, what a bore. Because I had that presupposition that research is confined to a laboratory. It's strictly basic science, wet lab. And that's because I had the background of having the great fortune to do a little bit of research in high school. I think, and that's one thing, I think get your hands on research as soon as you can, because you need to be able to, especially in this process of pre-med where there are intrinsically so many elements designed to weed you out, it's almost good for you to embrace that side, leverage that side to your own benefit, and try to do that yourself. Try to weed out your interests yourself, and that's just a part of self-betterment. If you can go to and apply for a research lab, and we'll get in how to apply to that, but apply to as many as you can, as many diverse disciplines as you can, at the same time realizing, oh, these are not all the same. Sometimes I get to go to the ocean and scoop up ocean water, or test the water for whatever, or sometimes I get to spend hours in a lab. Whatever tickles your fancy, intellectually speaking, you should try to engage with that, especially because research is such an important discipline in the realm that we are trying to get into of healthcare. If you can actually be a part of producing the body of knowledge that contributes to clinical practice, it not only officiates you in like a prestigious way, which I think is kind of an averse way to look at it, at least cardinally, but more centrally and intrinsically, you can improve the realm immediately. What you seek, what you see needs to be improved at the highest level. So kind of like a stepping stone of going from step 1 to step 10, what do we really get out of doing research? And it's how we get to contribute and give back, just like everything else, right?
Just to add on a little bit, I think like as a pre-med student, it's like very easy to say, oh, research is something that needs to get like checked off the checklist for med school application.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think it's like also important as like a future physician, maybe if you're working in healthcare field, just to like broaden your horizons, like learn more about the field that you want to go into and like see it as more than just a checklist. I honestly agree, like the research is kind of boring, but like at the end of the day, you learn so much, and you can like continue to, it just shows you like the world of possibility and how like all the possibilities there are, and how you can just continue to learn more and contribute more to like all of these new innovations, and bring awareness to certain, depending on the research I think we're going to talk about, but like bringing awareness to certain things. I just think it's such like an important aspect for not only med school applications, but just like in general for all of us as people.
Like, to wrap it up, like going from not knowing about it, thinking it's kind of boring, to realizing that we can actually contribute to the scientific discussion and discourse. And that's the part of the true value of research.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Like, I agree. Like, there's so many, right? Like we talked about, there's so many different types of research. I think talking like generally of like a bio cell lab research, it's cool because you get to like take what you learn in your courses and like apply it like in person. But also like the other types of research, just like I think it's very like intellectually stimulating to like be in an environment like that. Having these projects trying to answer like the unknown is a very unique experience, and I really recommend anyone who's watching it and interested, like go out there, and we'll talk about how to be able to do that. But being able to like dive into that world of research, I think, is really a really cool experience that should have. So speaking of that, where do we even start? How do we where do we start? How do we get into a lab? What does that look like?
I can talk a little bit about my experience. I didn't join a lab until my sophomore year at college, and I remember just like seeing all my peers in labs and feeling like I was falling behind. And it was like no matter how hard I tried to join a lab, I was just getting hit by like a wall every time. The biggest advice I've gotten, and it works, but obviously like there are some roadblocks, is just like messaging PIs, like messaging labs, showing your interests in those labs. And I'm not gonna lie, I think like the first few emails that I sent were very like copy paste, didn't really change much,
Nice.
which is probably why I was met with those roadblocks. But I think like once I really did like look into like what kind of research this professor was doing, what kind of research this lab was doing, that's when I made it like personalized. I made it like, this is why I would like to join your lab. I'd like to join because of XYZ. And I think that's honestly really what helped me, and it's like the advice that I could give to keep it like personalized and show that you are interested, and not that it's just because you want to put it on your application or anything like that. I had like periods where I would like apply for like a few labs, and then I would be hit with either no response or like, oh, we don't have room. And that would really unmotivate me. So I would just stop for a little bit and then come back to it. So it was like kind of like a wave. But
And Melody, is this through a formal application? This is in your sophomore year? Just
yeah,
cold call.
I literally just cold emailed.
Yeah.
I know there are some programs that some schools offer where you can apply for labs. I know that's like also an option. They provide you with research opportunities. I didn't do that. I don't know if you guys did, but I did not do that.
And this is UCLA, public school number one. This is UCLA.
Yeah, exactly. I from what I've heard, UCLA is it's difficult to dive into that research world because there's a lot of people, and a lot of times their labs are like filled with too much people, and they don't have room. So that's a really interesting like point that you bring up. And like the email, making it more personalized is better. Sometimes I have a few students that I have mentored, and what I have told them is that the PI that you're writing the email to, like, look at their most recent work. What are they currently interested in now? What are they looking at? And if you are interested in that and that's something you want to do, like, include that in the email. Like, make it personal. Be like, hey, I kind of stalked you. So, like, and start, like, explaining, like, hey, like, my name is, of course, introduce yourself. My name is like Ayeneh, and I was recently looking at your latest publication. And
do you embellish yourself? Like, do you make your email half CV, half like I've been stalking you, or do you just focus on them?
I do recommend including the CV in there for sure. Or just honestly, like, I think the first email, just kind of see if they're interested. Sometimes, like, again, they're full and that's like out of their control. And as much as they would really want you, they don't have like the space for that in there. But I do include my CV in there, and I do like recommend other students to like kind of do the same, because it kind of like helps them understand, why should I have you in the lab, for example. Like, yeah, you looked at my work, but like, what makes you stand out? And after their initial response, and then like, I will like usually recommend that someone like, maybe if you have like a lab report that you wrote in like your bio class, because a lot of times in our bio classes we do like write those like mock-up like lab reports. Something like that could be beneficial for them to see. If you don't have that, like, of course, like, that's not like completely necessary, but just anything to like
Sending them like almost like a writing sample.
right, anything to kind of like show like, hey, like I am interested in your work and this is like the passion and the skills that I can bring. And a lot of times like they're not really looking for like if you know everything or not, to be honest. They're really looking for if you have that drive. Are you interested in this research? Because of course, like the more like you're able to show them how passionate you are, like that's kind of what draws them in. Like, hey, like I would love to learn everything about this, and my passion for learning, like that is what would, I think, draw them in, because they're like, oh, this person's interested in the work, so it would be easier to like sort of teach them.
Makes it easier for them to see themselves in you also.
Yeah.
That, you know, this is almost like a younger version of myself applying to PhD programs. I was so interested in doing research.
I agree though. I think it's more about, I don't think it's about experience. I used to think like, I'm not going to get into any lab. I don't have any lab experience, but I think it was more like, I think showing that you are passionate and showing that you are driven, you want to learn and grow is what like inspires, or is what usually like indicates to them that you'd be a good fit. Like when I did my interview for my lab, I attached my CV, but they didn't know anything. Like it was like I didn't even attach my CV, which just shows that like they picked me, I hope, because like I was interested, and I don't think it was fully because of my experience. They taught me, and honestly, like what you were saying, were like little like young versions of them, like little young researchers. Yeah, so they taught me. So I do agree that like I think it's more about your drive.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. And like also like one other thing that I like do tell like some of the students that I have like mentored is like maybe include like a coursework that's sort of related to that lab. Like if it was a molecular bio class that you took, maybe be like, hey, I took this recently, because they don't have access to your transcript always. So I think that's also a nice, maybe relevant tip to kind of put out there as well.
Something else relevant, I had this thought. Some classes also grant you more akin to like a research lab experience. Like some classes you can elect to take, and it's like a lab, like not like a organic chemistry lab where they have you doing like set experiments, or rather they have you participating in research in a class. And it can be like the more streamlined classes, or it can be like the totally elected research, like some call it like 199 it was at UCI, where you take a research lab for credit. So kind of different variations of how to apply it in a more streamlined process, also to varying degrees in itself.
Yeah, like honestly, those types of classes, like those elective classes, like if you look at, depending on like your undergraduate school, but if you look at your coursework, there are elective classes that you guys can kind of look at, and those professors often have a lot of research experience like under their belt, and like they may not have like space maybe in their lab, or they may not be doing research themselves, but they definitely do have like faculties and like co-workers who are like in research and in the depths of it that you could like reach out to. And I think like that's a really good point, like taking those elective classes and making those connections with those professors, because a lot of times I think, at least like the friends I have and know, like the research that they were able to get into was through their professors, and like being able to have like a personal connection with your professor, like talk to them a lot, and like sort of like show yourself, make yourself stand out, and then like asking them if there's any research opportunities related, possibly.
I think the bulk of my research experience, the way that I got into that, exemplifies that. Research, there are some seemingly arbitrary barriers. Like one barrier presents itself in how to get in. That's the main focus of this program we're doing right now. And there is no, at UCI, my alma mater, there's no, not to my knowledge, there's no application to apply to research at the medical school. But somehow through shadowing, I managed to stumble into a position in clinical research, which, while peculiar, it seems, and cool, still research focused, it seems initially very closed off. Like, how do you do that? This touches on that. It's that word again, networking, right?
Connections.
Making connections, right? To my knowledge, I got into that research team because the physician that I was shadowing, who was also doing research, just happened to like the way that I wrote and I spoke. And that's how I got into clinical research. So something as banal as that, or that my neighbor growing up had a research lab at UCLA, and I was like, hey, like during my break, like, can I come hang out in lab? And he's like, yeah, but I'm going to put you to work. Something like that. So different ways to get into research, sometimes so like seemingly innocuous or banal, but also ways that are more formal. Should never detract from the formality of the actual procedure. You always put your best foot forward and present yourself as mature and interested, because that's ultimately what gets you into those positions and keeps you there, and potentially gives you some of those resume uplifting features, publications and abstracts and such. But ultimately you're there to enrich yourself, and that comes with mental maturity to seek that out.
Yeah, definitely. Like we talked about like cold emailing like professors, instructors, or lab PIs, but like also, like you mentioned, like we could stumble into research in different ways, and like sometimes it's like the way you least expect it. I'm sure you didn't go into the shadowing experience thinking, well, I will be able to have this opportunity, but because you were able to put your best foot forward, like that door opened for you. And I think like that's also important to like definitely talk about and touch upon. For me personally, like the way I got into research was I applied through a summer research program. It was supposed to be like a 10-week sort of summer internship, and I made the most of it. I like was eager to learn with my notebook and everything, like super excited. And because of that experience, I was able to stay in that lab like the whole academic year. And I was able to stay in there for 2 whole years. So that was like, so sometimes like, again, it could be cold emailing, shadowing, or sometimes like doing like a small like research sort of program over the summer can become something bigger. So like, one other thing I would say is like definitely look into your undergraduate schools. What programs are there, like little internships? It could be over the summer. There's some like schools that offer like, winter break, little short like research programs, and like look at those and apply if you have the time, and if you're able to, why not? That experience can only help you and help you grow towards your like academic and professional career. So like something like that was like, so my pathway, like I'm talking about like, oh, this is what you should include in your email, but it's like that's not necessarily what I did personally. But so like there's like different ways to like kind of go into it for sure. I think
you put out a lot of effort, and you received something in return. So kind of like bottom line is you get what you give, right? And if you want to increase your chance, if you agree, you want to increase your chance of getting into a lab or staying in a lab, you got to show that you're interested. You got to be there and be present. You can't just be
dedicated.
Spinning around in a lab chair reading a textbook the whole time, or pretending to read one on your phone. Like that's not going to cut it.
Yeah, especially like going on your phone. Like I know there's other people who were part of that summer program that didn't necessarily get into the year-long like situation, or like that
situationship,
or
internship.
Like I don't know, like what's the word? Like year-long like sort of commitment to it. And that's like because like they were on their phone, they wouldn't show up on time. And I know like this is hard to say because a lot of you guys have a lot going on in your lives, so it's like. So sometimes you might show up feeling exhausted, but just sort of like kind of trying to set that aside, and then the time that you're there, make it count. As soon as you leave, you can just like doom scroll on your phone, or like whatever you need to do to like de-stress, or like, let it out, I think is important as well. So yeah, definitely. What do you guys think about how early can you start research? I know, Ryan, you talked about you were able to do research in high school.
Yeah, I think the earlier the better. This is kind of a separate discussion of like the time scale of maturity. I think because being in lab requires a level of maturity and insight, just natural insight and kind of like, street smart almost, like, because as a PI, some of the worst interactions I've seen with PI to student is asking okay, there's no such thing as a stupid question, but it can be irritating to ask too many questions and be totally completely lost, right?
Yeah.
So, like, once you ask a certain question, try to make it so that you don't have to ask that question ever again, right? Once you're at that point, like bare minimum, where you're interested in this body of work, you feel independent enough to, to have that initiative to want to take on a project. Like, you should be mentally there in order to be here in the lab. In order to be like, at the bottom of the barrel, you should aspire to have your own project and be interested in research. I think it's kind of a mentality thing. Me, I didn't necessarily fit that bill, so I'm not necessarily practicing what I'm preaching, but I think just the mere exposure of it increased my likelihood later to apply interested into research and apply myself not literally but practically into research. And yeah, just the mentality shift. I think it has to do with maturity.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think just like you could start as early as high school, right? But if you're in that mentality, then like it's easier for you to get in, and like you can like make that work. And necessarily, like, it doesn't have to be a wet lab. You could do like dry labs, you could do literature reviews on, like, if you just go on PubMed, you create like sort of a hypothesis of like what are you interested in focusing on. Like, for example, this could be the Iranian American group, like in Los Angeles, for example. Like, very, like, the further niche your hypothesis is, and like going into an in-depth literature review, looking through PubMed, looking at peer-reviewed articles, that's something that like anyone could really do at home. Of course, there's like multiple steps, and like there's a lot of, like, we could even talk about that at like a certain point in the future. But like sometimes it can be that easy. You could do it at home, or sometimes it's at a lab, or so there's like different ways that research could look. But let's also talk about, Melody, you mentioned that you were able to like email and like get that research experience. Did you have to like interview for that position?
Yeah, so I had my interview. My interview was like an hour long, which I think was a good sign. I remember like freaking out about it. I'm like, is it okay that it was 45 minutes to an hour long? But I think like the biggest advice I could give is like really show that you are interested, and show that you want to like that you know what you are signing up for, I guess. So for me, I literally pretty much did research on the research, and I think I knew more about the lab than the actual people who work there, because they were also newer, and I was like bringing up stuff from like 3 years ago, like, you guys did this, I like this. So just like my biggest advice would be to just kind of do your research and see like what resonates with you, and like how you feel about it, how you would also help impact the lab. Like, they want to see that. They want to see that like, you are not here just to like we were saying, like doom scroll, or just sit down, or just to mark something, do a check mark on an application. They want to see that you are here because you're committed, you're interested in learning, you even if like I didn't know what I was doing, I didn't really have a lot of lab experience, I just kind of like faked it till I made it. And I did that by like doing my research on the research lab. And I think also just, showing that you want to get to know them more as well. So it flows more like a conversation and not like an actual interview. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's definitely good advice. I think, like, as you mentioned, like, we sort of talked about it in our emails, like showing that passion, and in the interviews, like, make sure to like have that same passion in person. And I know it's difficult because you can be nervous, but at the end of the day, like, remember, like, those lab PIs, those personal investigators are also human.
Yeah.
And they're very much like, just, I think, if I dare say, they're just very much like adult nerds that love science so much. So they're very passionate people generally. And I think if you're, show them your passion, show them your interest, and trust me, a lot of times they're really not scary, and they would love to, have you in their lab and, help them out. And also, like, speaking of like you could volunteer, or you could do internships. And like, I think with that said, you have to keep in mind, like, a lot of those PIs, if they have room and things like that, why not like have someone volunteer in their lab, So it's like, keep that in mind when you're in the interview, that, well, I could also be a really great contributor in this lab. And so kind of like give yourself a little bit of confidence of like, you know, I would love to like spend my free time here and like I could, you know, really show them like what I'm about, and like give yourself a pep talk before you go in there. And I think that would kind of help your nerves a little bit. But just remember that at the end of the day, like they're also like human. They're not like, you know, like big scary lab coat like people.
One of my one of my VIs, he was pretty big and he was pretty scary. So something I wanted to say was one thing that we have not said, so implication by omission here, is we haven't really talked about comparing ourselves to other people applying. I think it's something that you should avoid because of that. Because what if I lack experience? You have something to say about this?
Well, I'll let you finish.
Yeah, I would just say don't try. If you can, don't do that, because it does you no good. You may not get this, you know, because it's so competitive. There's so many UCLA, hundreds of students applying to this one cell bio lab. Just keep shooting your shot, and eventually you'll get somewhere. Just keep that level of passion. Make yourself more marketable, and become the you that you want to be. That'll help you get into a lab.
I think like for me, it was so easy to compare myself to others because everyone around me was like somehow getting into lab, and I was just like, I just keep getting hit with like barriers and roadblocks. I'm like, what am I doing wrong? Am I not good enough? So it's very easy to fall into that hole, I think, and just continue like spiraling. But I think at the end of the day, it's important to learn that one interview, one rejection doesn't define you, and also every interview is also like a learning process. Like you learn so much about how interviews work. What can you do to improve next time? Also, I wanted to follow up on before my previous response as well to the interview thing. I think it's important to also, let me know what you guys think, like send like a follow-up message thanking them for their time and like thanking them for you know, taking the time to meet with you, sharing their experiences with you, sharing more about the lab with you. I did that. And I did that after a few days, I think, because I hadn't heard back. And like once I did that, I immediately heard back, and they're like, you got accepted. We were really pleased to speak to you. So never hurts to send that follow-up email.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really important point that for sure, like I think goes a long way in that interview process. So like I think like in general, if we had to like sort of like summarize the interview, like be prepared to talk about yourself, be prepared to bring up relevant experiences. Like basic questions I think are good to kind of like have an idea of like what would my answer be for this, or like how do I feel about this. Like for example, they might ask you like, why are you interested in our research? Like, you know, again, be prepared to answer that. Or like they might even ask like, how do you you know, bounce back from like a setback? Because a lot of times in research, like it's not always like, oh wow, we got the results just like that. No, it takes like, there's a lot of like trial and error. And I think what most of the time they're looking for is, how are you able to take like something difficult, how are you able to take a failure and like make it like take a failure and like grow from that, essentially. So I think like having that sort of like in mind as part of the interview, and also, yeah, definitely send that follow-up email. That does go a long way. I really did forget to mention that. I think that sort of encompasses like the research process sort of for undergrads, is that you can do it. It's possible. Just believe in yourself. There's like different ways to get into research. It's not necessarily like, you know, like one, talking to your professor and cold emailing. As we talked about, there's other ways to get into it for sure. And prepping for that interview, like making sure like, you know, you send those emails and like really get into it. So I think that's all we have for today's episode. It was so great talking to you guys, and thank you so much. I will see you next time on صدای دانشجو.